Welcome to the Domain Name Wire podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Alleman, and this is episode 596. The clock is ticking down if you want to apply for a top-level domain name. Applications are due on August 12th. On today's show, I talk with someone who has launched a top-level domain name to better understand the business. Colin Campbell founded and launched .club, which he later sold to GoDaddy. Today, he discusses the cold, hard reality of running a top-level domain name. We talk about how long it took .club to turn a profit, the keys to getting distribution, and why running a TLD is a marathon, not a sprint. Sure, there are challenges, but that's not to say that it's not worth it. After all, Colin is applying again in this round. We'll chat with Colin in a few minutes. First, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor this week is Salve.com and its for-sale landing pages. You're paying too much to sell your domains when people visit them in the browser. Salve charges just a 4% commission. It's easy to list and they have fast payouts. In fact, if you sell a lot of domains with Salve, they'll even offer you instant payouts. If your domains are already at Salve, they transfer instantly. Otherwise, there's an easy process to transfer them. Learn more and start selling your domains at Salve. Go to salve.com/DNW/sell. That's sav.com/DNW/sell. All right, let's discuss some news from the domain business before we chat with Colin. Today, we're talking about that deadline for top-level domains that's coming up next month. As of about a week ago, Early Warning Report had 365 string requests submitted. Early Warning Report is a platform that helps companies understand if other entities are going to apply for the same top-level domain name. There is some overlap already between these 365 string requests. There are 41 with competing applications. More information is at earlywarning.report. Well, last week, Telegram's t.me domain was suspended, leading to outages. .me is the country code domain for Montenegro, and they're actually a pretty close partner with the .me registry, at least according to .me's website. They originally worked on Telegram.me, and then they used t.me as well. Telegram uses it for URL shortener. So what was the issue? Well, because it's a URL shortener, it's used for every username on Telegram, and one of those was t.me/ a company name that landed on the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets control list. Once Telegram removed that shortener, the domain name went back online. Now, because of this close partnership between Telegram and the .me registry, I'm a little bit surprised that this happened, and I feel like maybe someone dropped the ball on the initial suspension. Afternic recently rolled out what it's calling its portfolio agent. It lets you use natural language queries to get insight onto your domain portfolio and to do things even like adjust prices or change landers. I gave it a test drive last week. There's some pretty cool things you can do with it. For example, taking a cue from something that Elliot Silver had requested as a feature, I asked it to look at which domains had the highest ratio of searches in the last 30 days compared to the last 365 days, which might show that there's momentum on your domains. Now, currently, it is only available for portfolios of 500 or fewer domains, but the company is expanding that in the future. Identity Digital landed a whale for its Innovation Labs Advisory Board. Vint Cerf, who is considered one of the fathers of the internet for co-designing the TCP/IP protocols and later helping to establish ICANN, will help the company on its plans to use DNS as a way to identify agents. To learn more about what Identity Digital is doing to create these so-called birth certificates for AI agents, go back and listen to episode number 587 with Identity Digital CEO Akram Atala. Another piece of news here, Google is getting ready to launch the .eat, .here, and .fly domain names. You can read a story about that on Domain Name Wire, as well as a new trademark that VeriSign has applied for. Details on how to get more out of NameBio in an interesting lawsuit between two AI startups. Check that out at domainnamewire.com. Now, let's chat with Colin. My guest this week is Colin Campbell. He is an entrepreneur. He ran the .club top-level domain name. He's also the best-selling author of Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat, a book about entrepreneurship. Colin, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's been a few years, I think.
It has. I had to look it up. October 2023, I think you had just published Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat at the time, and we were talking about that book. So tell me, what's happened with the book since then?
The book's been a phenomenal success. When you do something like this, you don't really think it's going to really hit that big, but it did. It hit number one in 15 categories on Amazon. Just last week, we were number one again on Amazon. And we've won 40 global awards, including, some of the best nonfiction accreditations that you can get from groups like Kirkus, a Star Award, but also one of the best indie books of the year as well. So it's just done very well. But the reason why it's done well is because it's not about me. It's about entrepreneurship, how to start, scale, exit, repeat, and the formula that you can use to be successful at business. And we interviewed hundreds of people. About 50 of those people actually made the book. And we've captured those stories. It's a compilation of stories. It's 78 chapters. It's written for the ADHD entrepreneur. It's perfect for the domainer, by the way. We put a lot of stuff in there about .club and the history and domain registrations. And, domains have been such a big part of my life since 1996. And I started out on the farm and worked so hard to make a little bit of money. We used to pick raspberry flats and sell them at the market. And I worked so hard to make $20. And then fast forward 2 or 3 years later in 1996, we're selling these domain names for $299. Let me tell you a concept, Andrew. I'll give you a name. You give me money back. What do you think of that?
It's a pretty good concept. And it's even better if it renews every year and you have to pay a subscription fee.
That's right. So it's income for life.
Yeah. If anyone wants to go back and listen to more details about the book, again, that was October 2023. I believe it was episode 455. So you can look that up in your app or on the website. But I enjoyed the book. As you said, it weaves in your personal experience along with those of other people. In fact, you gave a shout out to a business that I sold right about then, which was podcastguest.com. And so it was great to see that in there. But there are a lot of neat takeaways. So I definitely recommend people check that out. I'll drop a link in the show notes here to the book as well. And
I'm still a member of podcastguests.com. Still use it, enjoy it.
I hope the new owner is doing good things with it. So, here we are in the middle of July, 2026. And the last time you could apply for new top-level domains is back in 2012. So a long time ago, but the deadline here is coming up in about a month, in August 12th. To apply. So let's go back in time. 2012, you applied for the .club domain, which you later sold to GoDaddy. Tell me about the trajectory, first of all. Obviously, outbid some people to get the domain name, but then you had to launch this domain. And this was kind of a new concept at the time. There had been other launches, but not at the scale of ICANN's new top-level domain program. So talk to me about how you started getting a trajectory and liftoff with this.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because when we first did our study, we looked at GTLD adoption rates and we looked at the very first day of registrations and extrapolated that over the next 10 years. And you can get a sense early on whether or not a TLD is going to take off. .club was one of those sort of like hidden gems. We were like a sleeper hit, the summer sleeper hit, because not a lot of big companies had their eyes on it. .shop, for instance, which, sold for tens of millions of dollars. .web, over $100 million. .online, I think was like 19 million, if I remember correctly. But, we're talking about extraordinary dollar amounts. We're still under confidentiality, but I can tell you we never paid near that when we did win our auction against Donuts and another company. For us, it was about identifying what would be a great domain extension that could be recognized globally, very short and understandable. So we had a mindset when we launched .club. We actually raised $12 million in total for the auction, for marketing, for everything. So this was not an inexpensive launch. This was like we had to raise money for this. And getting a big domain name like that out and building a brand around it, that was our strategy. When we kicked it off with 50 cents, I don't know if you remember that event, and 50 into club, right? 50 into club. And we launched it with a lot of fanfare and a lot of industry exposure. domainer support, and quite frankly, a lot of registrar support. We traveled the world, a few of us, Jeffrey Sass and Michelle Van Tilburg and I, and we traveled the world, and I call it a micro global brand. So anybody thinking about a GTLD in the space, they got to think of themselves as a micro global company. Even donuts, as big as they are, it's still a micro global company. And it means you're going to be traveling a lot. You're going to be connecting a lot. You're going to be really finding those registrars that you can work with that can really promote your domain extension. There's a lot of options in the world right now for domain registrars, for domain investors, for domain just entrepreneurs who want to buy a domain name. There's a lot of options and it's a lot of noise. And so how do you crack through that noise? .club. Thankfully, I think we followed sort of the number one thing that I've talked about when it comes to setting up a GTLD, which is have a great name. And a great name doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a category killer or a generic like a .club or a .shop or one of those .web or a .online. It doesn't have to be that. It can be a niche name. But the domain names that work with the TLD have to be good. So for instance, let me give you an example. If you take like dogbeds.club, it sort of doesn't work, right? But if you take like something like AI.club, yeah, there could be an AI.club. That's definitely a domain name that would be registered. It would be in high demand. That's the way you need to think about it, is how do these secondary names work on your GTLD? And how does that look and feel? And, and what is your sense around that? But a great domain name doesn't have to have 1 million users. It could have 5,000 end users if it's at the right price point and it made sense for that particular niche.
I actually have dog.club now, which I acquired.
Dog.club. You're competing with our paw.com. Yeah.
Dog.club and candy.club, which I bought actually within the past few years. I think GoDaddy was auctioning some stuff off after they acquired the top level domain. But when I think about what you did to run this domain, you mentioned raising $12 million. So a lot of money. Part of that went to winning the auction, but a lot of it was to marketing. You guys traveled like crazy around the globe, but it also took many years for you to turn a profit, right?
Yeah, I remember Stuart Lawley, who did XXX. Do you remember him?
Oh, yes. The late Stuart Lawley.
Told me once, he goes, Colin, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Anyone who's getting involved in this space, it's going to take time. Look, it took 15 years to go from, was it 15 years, 13 years, whatever, 14 years, to go from the last round to this round. And even if you get approval on your domain extension, you still could be talking about another 18 months, 2 years before it actually gets delegated. It takes a lot of time to do this. And once you're delegated, that's just the beginning. And then you've got to take it out to market. We were lucky to have Jeff Sass and Michelle Van Tilburg because they're two all-stars and they went and killed it. Quite frankly, they're amazing. And in fact, so much so that I've partnered with Michelle Van Tilburg on a new company that will be registering in the new round, but also will be providing management services for sort of independents who don't have the resources to be able to take their domain global, to do the travel, who don't have the relationship with distributors. We'll be offering a program where they can join our company and sort of like a co-op. We'll call it like a co-op environment. And we're looking forward to the new rounds. There's still gold in them hills. There's still gems to be mined, right? There are still some great names out there, but it's a different round. Competition is going to be a lot more extreme.
Yeah, I think about one of the challenges that you probably faced. It was a benefit, but it was also a challenge, is focusing on one domain name. You talk about when you travel all over the world, what if you had more than one domain to pitch to each registrar and that sort of thing? And which is kind of the idea of where a co-op comes in. I know the guys behind .icu, Short Dot, have been helping other companies that just don't have the resources to do it, or maybe underestimated how many people you need. I mean, you had Jeff Sash, you had Michelle Van Tilburg, but you also had a bunch of other people doing stuff for the business. I mean, this was not...
Yeah, Navu Hussain, who's actually working for Digital Identity now, Donuts. So
Identity Digital.
Yeah, it's just... Why change the name? I love Donuts. I thought that was a great name. But anyway, we'll leave it at that.
When you hear Colin refer to Donuts, it's actually what you might know now as Identity Digital, and you are not
Identity Digital. There you go. I couldn't even get that straight. Yeah.
So, but the first year, looking at some of your data, You guys lost $3.5 million. Had the domain even launched yet that year, or is that like just getting prepared for the launch?
I think it did launch that year. That was the 50-cent year. Cost more than 50 cents to pull that one off.
To get him, yeah.
But we did more than 50 cents. We got Virat Kohli on board with it. We got Demi Lovato. We had a number of founders. Look, we were launching what I call probably a top 10, top 20 GTLD. And I think it will be, if you go down in history, it'll be a top 20 GTLD. And it's one of those generics that needed to be branded, and you needed to create something around that. And so we invested in it, and it paid off. Our investors made 440% return on their investment from that initial $12 million. So the return was quite good, but we had a great domain name. Okay, so we had a generic domain name, something that could work in every country. It worked in Russia. It worked in China. In fact, it's interesting, but .club actually was the most popular countries were the United States, of course, but China, Russia, Turkey, countries you would not have expected to actually be embracing the .club. And so we did very well in those countries.
Club is an English word, they actually use that universally.
It's 100% universal. And again, it's a generic. Are there generics are there big names up for the grabs on this round? Absolutely. I mean, a .coin or a .bitcoin or a .agent or, some of these names will obviously do very well. But there's game theory at play here, right? Like we're going into this with our eyes wide open thinking, okay, yeah, it'd be great to have .bitcoin, but are you ready to spend $50 million to get .bitcoin? Probably not, right? So where are the spaces you're going to play that you can succeed in? And for us, it's really about what is the space we know and how do we win in that space and how do we apply for domain extensions in that space? There may not be on most people's radar, but they are niche. So we're not looking to do a .club repeat. What we're looking to do is to operate niche TLDs that work very effectively for the right market segments.
So when I look at the results, so you guys lost money basically for 5 years in a row, and then you started turning it
rub it in, don't you? Okay. That's the nature of accretive revenue businesses, right? And you're not we're the top of Namecheap, top of GoDaddy, top of GMO. We were the top of these registrars for years in a row. I mean, other operators like .xyz who've also made similar investments. You're going to lose a lot of money if you're trying to be a global domain brand. Okay, it's not going to happen. It's a recurring revenue business. 80% of recurring revenue businesses lose money. That's just that's a fact. It's my favorite type of business. I talk about that in the book, Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat, because it's the type of business you can build up and build and build and build. And look at those numbers you see in that article. It was very continuous. The profits just started surging, and we just flipped to a profitable, and then $1 million and $2 million, and then I don't even know if we had the later years in there in that article, but the fact of the matter is, it was very predictable, the outcome. Because it's a pretty easy equation, isn't it, Andrew? What's your COA, cost of acquisition? What's your LTV? If you know your churn rate, you know your renewal rate, whatever, you can easily calculate that. If it's costing you $50 to acquire a domain name, and what you're burning on the first year, right? The way accounting works is they make you expense marketing costs. You can't capitalize it. So $50 a year, and then let's say your lifetime value of that domain name is $150. Then you're making $100 every time you sell one, but you're losing money in year 1, 2, and 3. It's just fact.
Is there anything that you spent money on in those first few years that you wouldn't do again, that you could advise other top-level domain applicants? I don't know. I
don't like to go back and really do that. We threw a lot of spaghetti on the wall to see what stuck, and some did, some didn't. There were some programs that worked. But for the most part, we were doing a different play back then, and our play was a generic TLD, a brandable TLD. Now our play going forward is really a niche TLD play. And it's a different market. There's a different approach. It's much more of a laser beam approach, versus a scattered approach where you're trying to be everywhere on every search engine, on every search. And you pretty much now, if you go to GoDaddy, and I know they own it, but a lot of these other companies, when you type in a name that you're looking for, .club often comes up in the first 10 or 20 names because it just made logical sense. But one thing I would not encourage is people to try to stick a square peg in a round hole. Take a domain name that has no meaningless domain name and try to, and I know there have been a couple successes in the past. I don't know how successful, but from a financial perspective, but we know that if you're going in this and you think you're going to launch a generic name and that name doesn't have meaning. See, this is the key to GTLDs is meaning. If you have meaning, you don't need to sell it as much because people understand it. If I run a podcast and there's a .podcast domain extension, I don't know if there is or not, but if there is a .podcast domain extension, well, maybe there's your GTLD, Andrew. There you go. You love the space. Do a .podcast. Then if I'm running a podcast, that's a great domain extension for me. And if I see it in the search engine, it pops up right at the right time when I'm looking for my podcast name. It works. That's what I'm talking about. It's got to be meaningful. Don't think you can do these generic, weird WPX dot whatever, and you think it means world exposure. You have to explain what a domain extension means to 6 billion people on the planet. Then you've lost the battle from day one.
But if I'm hearing you, when you think about niche top-level domains, let's take .podcast, or I'm looking at the list from last round, .plumbing, for example, that Identity Digital has, .dentist. You're not going to pay for top placement on GoDaddy for a generic search, right? Because you've got to target, it's just not going to convert. You want to target plumbers, dentists, podcasters, that sort of thing.
No, you're not. But what you will do is you might pay for their auction. A lot of the registrars now have auctions where they auction off keywords, and you can actually bid on those words.
They do keywords on there. Okay. I didn't realize that. So if someone searches for something with plumbing in it, you could then have a bid for that.
Yeah, and especially with these AI engines now, right? And that's another thing, the LLMs, like if you're launching a new podcast, and by the way, I did just launch a new podcast a month ago.
Go ahead, pitch it.
No, I'm not. It's liveatsea.com, and it's a website, and we interview people who actually live at sea. And it's just a hobby of mine, something I really enjoy. But when you go to an LLM, if you ask the LLM, I'm looking for a podcast about living at sea, we're likely to come up, even though we just launched 2 or 3 months ago, because we've been able to create the content that the LLMs can see. So you want to have an LLM mindset when you go into the LLM. I'm talking about AI, an AI mindset when you go into this process. So a lot of people now are going to go to the AI, their favorite AI, and say, I am starting a business, and what would be a good domain extension for me? And there are some techniques you can use to get exposure in the LLMs.
So a new top-level domain applicant who's pulling the trigger soon, right? They need to apply here within the next month. They need to put in their $250,000 just for the application fee. They should expect to lose money at the top. What are some other things that you would tell prospective registrants to think about before going headfirst into this?
Well, I don't even know. Like we did a PPM, we did a 501B frame for this. For us, it was not about how many TLDs we're going to register. It's about how many TLDs we're going to register and the powder that we're going to have behind those TLDs to win the auction. So I would suggest to think about less versus more, but make certain you have powder to win in those ICANN auctions. I have many friends who are investing in this venture that we're starting here, Michelle and I. And I've told them this is more akin to gambling than investing. Because if you think about the way it's rolling out is you're putting $227,000 down and you may not get that money back. You can technically get 65% back if you withdraw by a certain date, but you're pretty much at risk of losing a substantial amount of your registration fee if you're in contention with a number of companies. And if you're, especially big companies, obviously if you're up against Google and they want the domain name, you're probably not going to win in an ICANN auction if you're a solo, operator here. So that's something to think about is how it's all going to roll out in the gameplay around that. I know Ray King has a service out there, the early warning report, we signed up to it. It's actually been quite interesting to watch and to see who, what domain extensions are being grabbed, at least the ones that, we were looking at. And how we're going to deal with that. We're probably, if there's like 3 or 4 bidders, we'll probably not go for it. But if it's 1 or 2, we'll say, okay, we can win that and then go all the way. So there's a lot of game play that goes on here. It's a lot of fun. I admit that, but it can be scary. It can be a little nerve-wracking because you're putting a lot of money up. Let's say, Andrew, you want a .podcast and you say, that's actually a good name. I could probably sell 30,000 of those in 3 years or 4 years, which is actually a decent business. you know what? But if you're up in contention, what do you do? And then you got to win that in an ICANN auction. And how much do you pay for something like that? Look, there's a lot of options available. There's a lot of competition. I don't think the value of some of these domain extensions are worth what some people will pay in auction. And the idea of speculation, I think that's pretty much off the table with ICANN and their
What do you mean
rules.
by that?
You know, domain GTLD speculation. There was the opportunity in 2012 to register domain extensions, and we had one bidder who did this, who was in the .club side, and we did a private auction, and the funds for that private auction got paid out to the losers of the auction. Well, that's not on the table. ICANN's been pretty direct about this.
After October, when they reveal what everyone has applied for, you're no longer allowed to do that. I get part of the idea between early warning report too is that you could potentially partner up or do a pre-auction, that sort of thing, but you'll never know if someone else is going to apply who's not participating in early warning report. But
yeah, I think we're not participating in that element of what we're doing is we simply join just to share with others what we're registering for, and they share with us what they're registering for. But it's pretty clear in the ICANN guidelines that no communication is allowed. And you have to attest to that with ICANN. And there are also other laws that if anyone going into this with the thought that they might do it for a private auction should probably really talk to an antitrust lawyer and really get clarity on whether or not there is some form of bid rigging or collusion involved here. But I'm not a lawyer. I know our team, we've done a lot of research on this topic, and we feel very comfortable with announcing our domain extensions. I even did it back in 2012 before the announcement date. And if people, they want to compete with us, they can compete with us, but we'll see them at an ICANN auction.
yeah, I think a big thing last time was that you could be a winner even if you were a loser. And by getting paid off, and this year that opportunity isn't there because of how the guidebook is written. Of course, now you can put in a primary string and a backup string, and there's a lot of game theory there too, I bet.
Well, there is. And it takes a lot more work, actually, because you've got to think about, okay, well, I've got these great names, but what if they don't, if I'm in too much competition, should I take the second name? But these second names have to be good as well, because you don't want a name that is not commercially viable. What am I talking about here? I'm just looking at like a dot table. Yeah, I just don't think you could sell more than 2,000 dot table names or whatever, or dot chair, or dot podcast is actually a good one. I actually like dot podcast. I won't take it from you. Don't worry about that. But there are fees that exist post. So you've got to pay the $227, but then you got about $25,000 in annual ICANN fees as well. And then again, you got to get out there and sell it, and you've got to, registrars are not just going to take you. They're going to charge slotting fees, or they're going to charge fees for different things that it costs money to play in the game here. And you just have to keep your eyes wide open.
Yeah, let's say someone's going in for a fairly niche domain, but they think they can get 5, 10, 15, 20,000 domains over time, make it worthwhile. What would you tell them, in addition to the $227 application fee, how much dry powder do you need just to kind of get out the door and get some of these slots at registrars and that sort of thing? Are we talking 1 million, 2 million, more?
No, I don't think it's that much for a niche TLD. Again, we're talking a different strategy than .club. What we're talking about is, highly targeted search queries and paying for those. And then sometimes you need to discount your domain extension in the first year. Like one of the big metrics that we tracked at .club was cost of acquisition per renewed domain name. Okay, cost of acquisition per renewed domain name, because we did have a lot of specials in the first year, and there's a lot of churn in the first year, and so it can get a little bit confusing. But ultimately, it's all about, once we get a renewal, then we knew we had at least a 70% renewal rate following that. And
right,
then we really had a good understanding.
The second year and
that's right.
Renewal.
Yeah. I think you could launch a TLD and you spend on it. It varies. It varies on the type of TLD, but if it's a niche TLD, I would think that you could launch a niche TLD for the application fee. If you don't get caught up in an auction and you manage to win the name without contention, then I think pretty much double that, $500,000, another $250 in your first year launch. And then second year, you're probably talking about 100,000 maybe in losses, and then down from there, because you don't have to do what we did at .club, which is try to establish a huge brand for a domain extension.
Now, to be fair, you have a background in doing this. You don't need to hire a consultant to figure out what your go-to-market strategy with registrars is. The legal, you don't need a consultant to tell you how to apply, that sort of thing. So for someone who's never done this before and might be going after one, it might make sense for them to have a little bit more in reserve for that sort of thing.
No, and that's true. And that's where I think there's opportunities to partner with companies like ours or other companies who can provide these management services and do it for you. There's ways of playing in the GTLD space. I actually like investing in this space because to me, it's different than in domain investing. To me, domain investing is like going to the casino and gambling at blackjack or roulette or whatever. You're gambling. Whereas owning the GTLD is owning the casino. My sense is that's a better gamble, owning the casino, than being the player at the casino. And there's different ways of getting, there are probably a number of companies, raising money in this space right now that you can get involved in. I know we have raised money for this space, but you can also, if you do have the funds to be able to do it and you don't have the relationships, because to be quite frank, distribution is your number one thing, okay? If you don't have global distribution, it's very hard to have a successful domain extension. And we have the relationships with everyone from GoDaddy to Namecheap, and Ray King would obviously get mad at me if I didn't say Pork Bun. And, we've got the relationships with so many registrars globally. It's probably more Michelle than myself even who has those relationships because she's really hands-on on the ground. It took us 10 years to build that at .club, and we built it, and people love us. We tend to be loved in the market. I don't know why. We did have a lot of parties, and hopefully we can have some more parties. I would enjoy that.
You need to save some money for parties.
That's right. There you go. Of course.
But let's think about different this time. I mean, we had 1,000 domains come out of the last round, hundreds of domains. We're back again. You mentioned that there are obviously new terms, .crypto, .bitcoin, that weren't really popular back then. And you have some overlooked niches. You have, if you look at, now to be fair, Identity Digital, they have, let's see here, they have under 3,000 registrations for .fishing, for .cooking, for rehab, limo. That's kind of on the lower end, but of course they're doing this at scale. But I'm sure they'd still think, wow, wish we could have more there. But what else do you think will be different? There's so many options now for top level domains.
It's in some ways it's going to be easier because .com definitely ruled the roost in 2012. It probably still rules today, as you all know. And we own paw.com, right? It's a dog products company. But people are more comfortable now with longer extensions, niche extensions. I get the sense that if you launch a domain name, you don't have to put a lot of marketing muscle behind it, as long as you connect at the right point when that buyer is looking to brand their business or idea or their podcast or whatever it is. So I think in some ways it's easier, but you just have to be realistic that these are not going to be huge numbers. And 80 to 90% of the great domains were taken off the market in 2012. So you got 10% of the market left. You're basically fighting for crumbs. Now, there are some terms like .bitcoin and .agent was another one we were bouncing around looking at the other day. It seems like there's a lot of companies applying for that.
There'll be a few applications for that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, times change. Maybe there's a different model where you get ahead of the curve. I was thinking of .quantum this morning. I don't know. Could it go .quantum? Quantum computing. Who knows? But you could register that and get 1,000 registrations and you lose money, obviously. But it's all about, location, location, location. We always hear that, right? It's about distribution, distribution, distribution. It's about getting in front of the people at the right time, at the right place. And don't pay to get in front of people if your name doesn't really make sense for the people. If you don't want to pay for bad searches, essentially, you want to pay for good searches. And we've actually got some very cool technology we developed at .club where it did a lot of the auction management for .club. But now we've taken that and just for fun, we've been playing with agents and using agents to manage a lot of the functions we used to manage at .club with humans. So this is interesting because this allows you to bring your costs down as an operator. And because of that, gives you more of an opportunity to make a profit and be able to scale it probably faster because you'll be able to invest more money back into the marketing of the company.
So any other tips or secrets that you'd like to give to people that are thinking about applying for in this round?
Yeah, I think we talked about distribution, we talked about the search. And I talk about this in the book, actually. If you love what you do, it's a lot easier to get through the roller coaster, okay? So for instance, if you love pets, and I know you own dog.club. So if you love pets, that's something you want to focus on, like we did at paw.com. Or, we also have, in my companies, we also have Airbnbs. We have 19 Airbnbs in South Florida. So I'm sort of thinking about that. I'm throwing this out there. I was thinking about .bnb, but then I backed off when I saw the lawsuits coming from Airbnb when anyone's tried to go down the BNB path. I don't want to reveal too much about what our strategies are, but if you do love something and it's a space you enjoy, you can understand it better and you can position it better and you can survive the roller coaster and the marathon that comes along with owning a GTLD.
So, Colin, before we wrap here, again, I'll put in a link to your book, but if people want to talk to you about this next round, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. And feel free to do so. I mean, LinkedIn is a great way. So just look at Colin C. Campbell on LinkedIn and you can connect me there. If you want, you can even email me at colin@campbell.club. That is my personal email address. Also, colin@startup.club. That's my sort of my business address as well. But I prefer, LinkedIn's a nice way of being able to manage that because I do get a lot of people contacting me, especially since the book came out. Every week I get somebody contacting me saying, "Oh, I read your book. I loved it." And and I said, "Well, could you please do a review on Amazon?" It's so hard to get reviews from people. But no, we have 4.8 stars on Amazon. So we're very happy with that.
Awesome. All right. Well, Colin, thanks so much for coming on the show this week. And of course, here come a month or two, we'll start learning what everyone's applied for. So I can't wait to learn what you applied for. So thanks again.
And it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, let me tell you.
As someone who covers this industry, I'm really looking forward to this fall. So.
It's like the Hunger Games of GTLDs. There you go.
All right. That's a wrap on this week's Domain Name Wire podcast. You can listen to all previous episodes at dnw.com/podcast or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.